The dust rose in heavy clouds around the corral, turning the late afternoon sun into a dull, golden haze. Men shouted, ropes swung, and another cowboy hit the ground with a thud that echoed through the ranch yard. The black stallion reared high above him, its muscles glistening, mane flying like dark fire. The crowd gasped as the cowboy scrambled out of the way, coughing and cursing. The stallion snorted, pawing the dirt, wild eyes flashing. Sarah McCriedi stood at the fence, fingers gripping the rough wood so tight her knuckles turned white. She had watched 12 men try to break that horse in 3 days. 12 strong, experienced riders. And every one of them had failed. The animal was beautiful, wild as the Texas wind that swept over the plains, and everyone in Red Creek knew he would never bow to a saddle. Sarah was 17. She had never stayed on a horse longer than a few seconds before being thrown. Her brothers called her hopeless. Her father, the great rancher Robert McCriedi, barely looked her way anymore. The McCriedi family had tamed this land for 3 generations, but their youngest couldn't ride a single horse without falling. At the dinner table, her brothers Jack and Thomas made their usual jokes. "Maybe we should get her a rocking horse," Jack would say, and everyone laughed. Sarah would stare at her plate, pretending the words didn't sting, but each one left a small bruise somewhere deep inside. Even the ranch hands whispered when she passed. Her mother had been her only comfort. Before she died 2 years earlier, she told Sarah, "You're not missing courage, sweetheart. You just feel things deeper than most." Those words stayed with her, though they didn't quiet the pain of being the family's disappointment. Something happened to Sarah when she climbed into a saddle. Fear. It didn't come from her mind, but from somewhere deeper, like her body remembered something she didn't. The horses sensed it instantly, and they turned restless beneath her. The black stallion had appeared months earlier, running wild with a small herd of mustangs near the northern border of the ranch. He was like nothing they'd ever seen, strong, proud, with a coat that shimmered like midnight. Her father had made it his mission to capture him. The ranch had suffered a harsh winter, losing half its cattle, and he saw the stallion as a way to restore their name. When they finally trapped him in a canyon, the horse fought with a kind of intelligence that made men uneasy. He bit through ropes, kicked through gates, and no one could hold his gaze for long. Her father announced that anyone who could break the stallion would earn $1,000 and a share in the ranch. Every cowboy in the county came. Everyone failed. Some left with broken ribs, some limping, all of them humbled. At night, when the noise faded and the lamps went out, Sarah would sneak to the corral. She would sit quietly on the fence and watch the stallion pace in the moonlight, proud and untamed. There was something in his eyes, a fierce loneliness that she understood. He didn't belong to anyone. He didn't want to. She started leaving apples for him on the fence post. At first he ignored them, tossing his head with disdain. But curiosity has its own kind of hunger, and one night he finally stepped close enough to take one. Sarah sat frozen as he ate, his breath warm on the cool night air. He lifted his head and met her gaze. For a long moment, neither moved. She felt her heart beating so hard it hurt. She reached out, slowly, her hand trembling. The stallion didn't pull away. His nose brushed her palm, soft as silk. From that night on, everything changed. Sarah began spending every spare minute by his corral. She talked to him about everything, her mother, her fears. The way her father's silence hurt worse than his words. The stallion would stand still, listening. Over time, he began to respond in small ways, tilting his head, stepping closer, following her voice. She touched his neck, then his flank, then his mane. The men on the ranch started noticing. The same people who laughed at her now whispered in confusion. "That horse lets her touch him." One said, "Never seen anything like it." Her father watched from a distance, saying nothing, but his eyes followed every move she made. Weeks passed. The stallion's wildness didn't fade, but it softened when she was near. He still had fire in his spirit, but it burned with trust instead of fury. Sarah didn't use ropes or spurs, just patience. She learned his moods, his rhythm, his quiet warnings. Then one morning, Sarah woke with a calm she'd never felt before. She knew it was time. Word spread fast. By noon, every ranch hand, neighbor, and cowboy who'd failed to tame the stallion gathered around the corral. Sarah's brothers leaned against the fence, smirking. 5 seconds, Jack muttered. That's how long she'll last. Her father stood apart from the crowd, arms crossed, face unreadable. Sarah stepped into the corral carrying only a simple rope halter she'd made herself. No saddle, no bridle. The stallion stood waiting, his coat shining in the sunlight. When she approached, he didn't rear or snort. He lowered his head. The crowd went silent. Sarah slipped the halter gently over his muzzle. Then, moving slowly, she climbed the fence, placed a hand on his neck, and pulled herself onto his back. He stood still, completely still. Sarah leaned forward, resting her cheek against his mane. She could feel his heartbeat, steady and strong. She whispered something soft, something only he could hear. And then, the wild horse began to move. Not a buck or a kick, just a quiet walk. Around the corral, smooth and calm, dust rising at their feet. Every eye watched in disbelief. Sarah sat tall, her hands in his mane, moving in perfect rhythm. It wasn't force that held her there. It was trust. And for the first time in her life, Sarah didn't fall. She belonged. No one spoke for a long moment after the black stallion stopped in the corral. The wind rustled through the dry grass, the only sound breaking the silence. Then someone whispered, "Did you see that?" And the spell shattered. The ranch hands began murmuring, the disbelief in their voices plain. Jack and Thomas just stared, the smirks wiped clean from their faces. Sarah slid down from the stallion's back, landing softly in the dust. Her knees trembled, but not from fear. The stallion turned his great head toward her, pressing his muzzle lightly against her shoulder. It was a gesture so gentle, so human, that it brought tears to her eyes. Her father climbed over the fence, his boots crunching the dirt. The crowd fell silent again as he walked toward her. For a man known to show little emotion, his face looked almost uncertain. He stopped a few feet away, eyes fixed on his daughter Sarah. He said quietly, his voice rough, "How did you do that?" She swallowed, unsure how to answer. "I didn't make him do anything," she said softly. "I just listened." Her father stared at her for a long moment, then looked at the stallion, who stood calmly beside her, unrestrained. He shook his head in disbelief. "That horse broke every man who tried to ride him," he said, "and you just walked in and—" His words trailed off. Sarah thought he might be angry, that his pride would flare up in front of all these men. But instead, something else showed in his eyes, something she hadn't seen since her mother was alive. Pride, yes, but also regret. He nodded slowly. "You did good, girl," he said, and turned away. The men began to cheer. Someone shouted, "She did it!" and the sound spread like wildfire. The ranch hands slapped each other on the back. The cowboys who'd been thrown by the stallion shook their heads, smiling in disbelief. Sarah felt her heart swell, not because of their praise, but because, for the first time, she felt seen. That evening, the ranch yard buzzed with talk. The sun dipped low, painting the horizon in orange and red. The stallion grazed quietly near the fence, his black coat catching the light like liquid fire. Sarah sat nearby, watching him. She didn't feel like a hero. She just felt at peace. Her father came to her as the first stars appeared. He stood beside her without speaking for a long time. Then he said, "Your mother would have been proud." Sarah blinked back tears. "You really think so?" "I know so," he said. "She always said you had a way of feeling what others couldn't." Guess she was right. Quote, "For the first time in years, Sarah smiled without forcing it. He's not broken, Pa." She said he's just free in a different way. Her father nodded. Maybe that's the way it should be. From that day forward, things began to change. Sarah still helped with chores, still rose before dawn and worked until dark. But now, the ranch hands looked at her differently. They nodded when she passed. Some even asked for her advice. Her brothers stopped teasing. Jack, the oldest, even apologized one night by awkwardly handing her a saddle blanket embroidered with her initials. The black stallion, who she had started calling Ransom, became her shadow. He followed her when she carried water, waited near the gate when she fed the cattle, and even came when she whistled. He never accepted anyone else near him. Not her brothers, not her father, not even the gentlest stable hand. Only Sarah. But peace on a ranch never lasted long. One night a storm rolled over the plains. Thunder cracked, lightning lit up the hills, and the cattle panicked. The herd broke through the lower fence and stampeded toward the open prairie. The ranch erupted into chaos. Men grabbed lanterns, shouting orders into the wind. Sarah ran out of the barn barefoot, her hair whipping in the storm. Jack was already on horseback, yelling, "They'll head for the canyon if we don't turn them." Her father called, "Stay back, Sarah. It's too dangerous." But she was already running to Ransom's pen. The stallion stood restless, eyes wide at the thunder. Sarah swung the gate open. "Come on, boy," she said breathlessly. "They need us." Without hesitation, Ransom lowered his head and let her climb on. Rain lashed her face as she guided him through the dark. Following the distant sound of hooves, the night flashed white with lightning, revealing hundreds of cattle charging toward the canyon rim. "Easy, boy," she whispered. "We can do this." She pushed her knees gently, and Ransom surged forward. They cut through the herd like wind through grass. Sarah shouted, waving her arms, guiding the led cattle away from the cliff edge. The ground shook beneath them, the storm roaring above, but Ransom never faltered. Jack spotted her through the rain. "Sarah," he yelled, "you're insane!" She didn't answer. She just kept moving, circling the herd, turning them back one group at a time. The other riders followed her lead, trusting her instincts. Within minutes, the cattle began to settle, their panic easing. The danger was passing. When the last of the herd turned safely back toward the valley, Sarah pulled Ransom to a stop. Lightning flashed again, and in that moment, she saw what they'd done. Hundreds of animals saved from the canyon's edge. Her chest rose and fell with exhaustion, rain dripping from her hair, but she was smiling. Back at the ranch, soaked and shivering, Sarah slid from Ransom's back. Her father was waiting under the barn awning, eyes wide with disbelief. "You could have been killed," he said. His voice trembled. But there was pride under the fear. Sarah met his gaze. "You taught me to take care of what's ours," she said simply. Tonight, that included them. Her father stared at her for a long moment, then pulled her into a rough embrace. The smell of rain and horses filled the air. "You're your mother's daughter," he said quietly. Behind them, Ransom stood like a statue, steam rising from his coat in the cool night air. His dark eyes gleamed in the lantern light, calm and watchful. And from that night on, no one ever laughed at Sarah McCriedi again. The morning after the storm, sunlight poured across the Texas plains like liquid gold. The air smelled of wet earth and new beginnings. Sarah stood by the corral, her hair still damp, watching Ransom graze quietly near the fence. The ranch had survived the night. No cattle lost, no riders injured. For once, everything felt right. Her father came out of the barn, his shoulders straight but his face soft. He wasn't a man of many words, but the few he spoke carried weight. "Town's talking," he said simply. "Word spread fast about what you did." Sarah smiled faintly. "Let them talk." He nodded. "They're saying you and that horse saved more cattle than 10 men could have." "I don't know if that's true, but I do know this." He paused, voice rough. "I've never been prouder." Those words hit her harder than any applause. All her life, she'd chased a kind of approval that seemed impossible. Now it had found her when she wasn't even trying. As the weeks passed, something new grew on the ranch. The same men who once mocked her now watched her work with quiet respect. Ranchers from neighboring counties came to see the girl and the wild horse. They wanted to know how she'd done it, how she'd tamed the unbreakable stallion. Sarah always smiled and said the same thing. "I didn't tame him. I learned to listen." Quote, "People didn't always understand, but those who stayed to watch her work began to see what she meant. She didn't force or frighten the horses. She waited. She spoke softly, moved slowly, and treated each one as if it had a story to tell. And every time, they responded. Ransom stayed by her side through it all. He was still wild at heart. He would never wear a bit or take a whip. But with Sarah, he was gentle. Sometimes she thought he could read her thoughts before she spoke. Together, they became a symbol of something the ranch had never seen before: respect between strength and softness. By summer, riders from across Texas began visiting the McCriedi ranch to learn from her. They brought their roughest, most stubborn horses. Sarah taught them how to earn trust instead of forcing obedience. Some called her strange, others called her gifted, but everyone left changed. Her brothers were the first to admit they'd been wrong. One evening, as the sun melted behind the hills, Jack walked up beside her while she brushed Ransom's mane. "You showed us something we didn't understand," he said quietly. "We thought riding was about control." "You proved it's about faith," Sarah smiled, handing him the brush. "It's about both. You can't guide what you don't respect." From that day, even Jack began treating the horses differently. Thomas, too. The ranch changed under her hands. Fewer bucking, fewer broken spirits, both horse and human. Months turned to years, and Sarah's name began to spread beyond Red Creek. Travelers came from as far as New Mexico and Oklahoma to see the young woman who could calm any horse with a whisper. They called her the girl who spoke to wild things. She didn't care for titles or fame. All she wanted was peace, and she found it every time she rode with Ransom across the wide-open plains. Those rides became her prayer, her way of thanking the land and her mother for guiding her heart where her hands once failed. But even peace carries its tests. One autumn afternoon, a stranger rode into Red Creek. He was a tall man with a scar along his jaw and a horse that fought the reins like a trapped storm. He claimed to be from a wealthy ranch farther south and had heard of Sarah's gift. "They say you can gentle any animal," he said. "If you can handle this one, I'll pay whatever you ask." Sarah studied the horse, its eyes wild with fear. "He's not mean," she said softly. "He's hurt." The man laughed. "He's dangerous, that's what he is. No woman can fix that." Her father, standing nearby, narrowed his eyes. "Careful how you speak," he said. Sarah raised a hand. "It's all right, Pa." She approached the horse slowly, her voice steady. "Easy now. Nobody's gonna hurt you." The stallion snorted, muscles tense. The stranger scoffed, but before he could speak again, the horse lowered its head slightly toward Sarah's hand. She smiled gently. "See?" she whispered. He just needed someone to listen. The man's laughter faded. He dismounted, shaking his head in disbelief. "Well, I'll be damned." Her father stepped forward, pride shining through his weathered face. "Told you she was special." That night, Sarah sat by the fence, watching the stars rise over the plains. Ransom stood beside her, calm and silent. The wind carried the scent of sage and dust, the sound of crickets filling the air. She thought about how far she'd come, from the girl who couldn't ride to the woman who helped others believe in gentler ways. She reached up and rested her hand on Ransom's neck. "You chose me when no one else did," she whispered. "Guess we both needed that." Quote. The stallion flicked his ears and breathed softly against her shoulder, and for a long time they stayed that way, still and content beneath the Texas sky. In the years that followed, the story of Sarah McCriedi and the wild black stallion spread far and wide. People told it in ranch houses, in saloons, and around campfires. But the version Sarah liked best was the one her father told. He never called it a tale about taming a horse. He called it a story about finding your own strength, about the courage to be different in a world that demanded you be the same. Sarah's ranch became a place of learning and kindness, where horses were treated not as beasts to be conquered, but as partners to be understood. And long after her hair turned silver and her hands grew lined, Ransom still roamed beside her, wild and free, never truly owned, but always home. And in the quiet evenings, when the sun dipped below the horizon and the air turned cool, neighbors swore they could still see them riding together, girl and horse, silhouetted against the crimson sky, moving as one. If you felt this tale in your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Wild West Emotional Tales, where every story rides through the dust, the danger, and the kind of love that never dies. See you in the next tale, partner.